Hello and welcome to the Guiana Space Center for the 10th Ariane launch of 1998, one day later than expected. Following anomalous satellite telemetry readings observed during checkout operations yesterday, it was decided to postpone the launch for 24 hours to analyze the problem, if problem there was, and to review the situation this morning. As you'll have realized, a positive decision was taken, we're counting, and we're now less than 29 minutes to go to liftoff. The camera has brought you in to join us in mission control in the Jupiter 2 building, where commentary for tonight's event is being provided in French and English. I'm Simon Hayes. Our last weather report was satisfactory, and all other status panel parameters are showing green for go. We have a 33-minute window for this flight, opening at 9:43 p.m. local time. Equivalent times elsewhere are showing on your screen now. This live broadcast is going out to 6 sites in France, as also Washington, D.C., Mexico City, and a number of other sites in Mexico. Buenas noches a todos. Tokyo, Japan, a large local public here in Guyana, including the Dublin party. Hi there, Kian, Stephen, and Eamon. And viewers taking Space Night in Germany. Schönen guten Abend, dann Georg Scheller. Our location close to the equator represents an optimum start point for launching east into geostationary transfer orbit and north into polar orbit. The 42L version with 2 solid propellant boosters is the third most powerful in the Ariane-4 family and matches the performance requirement of 4.2 tons for this flight. Data for the 3 main stages and the PAL solid boosters are on your screen now. This is the 83rd Ariane-4 launch and the 8th time the 42L version has flown. The launcher is topped off with the vehicle equipment bay and the fairing, which protects the payload during atmospheric flight. A short pattern fairing is being used for this single launch, and snug down inside is the SATMEX 5 satellite. SATMEX 5 will be placed into a special geostationary transfer orbit, and after circularization, the spacecraft will take up station at 116.8 degrees west over the Pacific Ocean. SATMEX 5 is the 3rd Mexican satellite to be launched on Ariane. 26.5 minutes to go and all is green. And introductions. First, the Ariane Space Mission Manager, Philippe Roland. With his colleagues, he's been working on the preparation of this Ariane mission for many months. Next, Pierre Ebardier, the DDO, the Range Operations Manager. He's sitting in the DDO seat for his 24th launch. He'll be giving us information on launcher status data as from liftoff. And the third member of the trio, the COIL, the Launch Site Operations Manager, who we just saw, André Sicard. He's the COIL for Flight 114. He heads a team of specialists in the Launch Control Center. And I'll be back with you after the break, which is just coming up. It now has a very strong Ariane 5 flavor.
Versatile, flexible, powerful.
Attention pour le début de la séquence synchronisée, top moins 7 minutes.
Donc les H0 moins 3 minutes, correct.
Déroulement correct.
À tous, du DDO, attention pour le décompte final. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, top. Allumage Vulcain.
Ignition of main engine.
Allumage ERP.
Solid booster ignition.
Décollage.
Lift off.
Propulsion normale.
Propulsion normal.
Tous les paramètres sont normaux à bord.
All systems normal.
Trajectoire normale.
All okay on board.
Ready to serve your business.
Well, not only Ariane-5, but quite a bit of 2001 Space Odyssey, I would say. But the clip did capture many of the exciting moments in the Ariane-5 final qualification flight just 6 weeks back. Another introduction, Françoise Bouzita, Secretary General of Ariane-Start, heads the Flight Command Cell for tonight's launch. The Flight Command Cell has a supervisory function and only intervenes in the event of a major problem, for example, where a decision to go ahead with the launch or stop the count is required. Time and status under 22 minutes, and our launch authorization parameters continue steady on green. We had a close-up of the panel then, which we shall be watching constantly right through to liftoff. It gives us a permanent overview of the main components of the Ariane system. And now some film on the launcher preparation campaign for Flight 114. The Ariane-42L for this launch arrived in French Guiana by sea in mid-October for a launch campaign of no more than 25 working days, but extending over more than 6 weeks due to other launch interruptions and delayed arrival of the satellite. The first part of the campaign was devoted to de-stocking, erecting, assembling and checking out the launcher stages. After erection of the first stage on the mobile launch table, the launcher is anchored to the table by 4 clamps. The second stage was added. We shall see the external thermal cladding of this stage shred off the launcher during the first few seconds of ascent, followed by the 2 liquid propellant boosters on successive days. And the third stage, recognizable by the brick-like thermal cladding, was hoisted and slewed into position over the lower part of the launcher. And the last piece of the kit, for the moment, the Vehicle Equipment Bay, or VEB, was mounted on the completed Ariane power pack. Here we see the VEB. Final preparation procedures in the assembly dock were followed by rollout of the launcher, only lacking the upper payload composite, up the 1 kilometer of dual rail track to the ELA-2 pad 2 weeks back. The cryogenic fueling arms were closed onto the third stage valve plates and the service gantry brought in over the launcher. The gantry protects the launcher and provides access for integration of the payload composite, lower stage fueling and other pre-launch tasks. It's withdrawn just a little over 5 hours back from liftoff. Another peek at Ariane. Nothing seems to have fallen off. That's good. The final phase of the third stage fueling with liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen continues. And it's time to meet some members of the SATMEX team here in Mission Control. Juan Manuel Zamudio is SATMEX Vice President Engineering and Operations, and Bob Mitchum of Hughes Space and Communications is SATMEX 5 Project Manager. Most of the team are in the Technical Center S1 building and the Launch Control Center, monitoring the health of their satellite and waiting patiently for liftoff. We have some film now on SATMEX 5 and the SATMEX company.
Bienvenidos a SATMEX.
Bienvenido a SATMEX.
Bienvenidos a SATMEX.
SATMEX será la empresa satelital preferida en toda Latinoamérica. Bienvenidos al mundo de SATMEX.
Less than 14 minutes to go to liftoff, and a reminder for latecomers that you're watching live from Kourou the final stages of the countdown for Ariane-Start flight 114 carrying SATMEX 5. Other members of the SATMEX party here in Mission Control include, and Mexican viewers will recognize them all even if I get them in the wrong order, Sergio Autre, SATMEX chairman, Carlos Ruiz Sacristan, Mexican Minister for Telecommunications and Transport, Laura Gonzalez, SATMEX CEO, and Charles Toups, Hughes Space and Communications, and alongside them the Ariane payload manager for this flight, Jean-François Lemonnier. As I said earlier, this will be the third satellite we've launched for Mexico following Solidarity 1 and 2, and we have some film now of the SATMEX satellite campaign. SATMEX 5 with its final checkout equipment was flown in to Cayenne-Rochambeau just 2 weeks back. We saw some pictures just now. For a typical short Hughes shoot-and-shoot satellite campaign. SATMEX was brought into the final preparation building in the ELA-2 launch site premises where the checkout procedures were commenced after removal of the protective packing. These tasks included final assembly of the satellite with its payload adapter, and the last major operation was fueling up with a load of more than 2 metric tons of MMH and MON propellant for the satellite's orbit station acquisition and station keeping thrusters. Encapsulation of SATMEX 5 took place 1 week ago, with the 2 halves of the fairing closed in over the satellite adapter assembly, and the payload composite was moved out to the foot of the gantry, hoisted to the top of the platform and mated with the launcher via the vehicle equipment bay. One final task was adding the huge SATMEX logo sticker. Remember, the fairing itself stands more than 8.5 meters high. Under 11.5 minutes to go, and it still looks good. News of 2 passengers on the last Ariane 4 flight, 113 on 28th October. The 2 spacecraft, Africa Star and GE5, are both in course of in-orbit testing, and this is proceeding satisfactorily. And we return for a moment to the CDL, the Launch Control Center. That's a significant title, but what actually goes on inside this bunker, only 1,000 meters from the pad? This is where all the ground support systems are configured and managed, fueling, controlled environment, ground power supply, and so on. In addition to human personnel, the CDL includes the 2 powerful ground computers. More of that later. And now in translation, Alain Clavier of Ariane-Start on the subject of mission preparation and trajectory calculation. Planning an Ariane mission is an extremely complex operation, totally specific for each satellite passenger and each launch. All the customer's requirements must be taken into account: the final target orbit, the conditions necessary for jettisoning the fairing, satellite separation altitude and velocity, and so on. Using this information, the optimum trajectory and configuration of the orbital phase are defined according to the available capacity of the launcher. The objective is to place the payload into the target orbit with minimum energy consumption, and contrary to what one might expect, this does not mean taking the shortest route. Defining this route is a complex and lengthy task. Many months are required to calculate the best possible trajectory, which is then loaded in the launcher's onboard computers as the key element of the flight program. The actual mission of the Ariane launcher is in 2 phases. The powered flight phase commences with ignition of the first stage engines and terminates with shutdown of the 3rd stage at the actual point of orbit injection. The main purpose of the first stage burn is to break clear of the Earth's atmosphere as rapidly as possible. The objective here is also to reduce total mass equally quickly by discarding each part of the launcher as soon as its task is done, the boosters as soon as they burn out, and the fairing when the remnant atmosphere no longer presents a problem. The same applies to the 1st and 2nd stages. These are separated on burnout and drop back into the Atlantic. During the latter part of the third stage burn, the pull of the Earth's gravitational field is used to increase the launcher's velocity. This is why we see the trajectory dip during the third stage flight before the final climb, shutdown, second phase, payload separation, and the end of the mission. For Flight 114, we shall use practically all available launcher energy, burning most of the propellant reserve to inject SATMEX 5 into optimum transfer orbit. I'll come back to that reference to depletion of the propellant reserve later on. And while we were watching that clip, we had the final pre-launch weather report, and the news were good, as confirmed by the well-behaved status panel. We have a weather map here, and we have no problems whatsoever inside our launch window. The satellite has been sitting up top of the launcher for the last 5 days. This means that the environment inside the fairing has been strictly controlled, temperature and humidity, within tight tolerances, and this is in fact a continuation of the clean room approach maintained during the earlier stages of satellite manufacture. This function is provided by the umbilical tower through the waiting period and naturally continues when the service gantry is moved back off the launcher, which we see just now. Our last footage of film, in fact, was shot only 6 hours ago. We see the gantry withdrawal procedure. It takes a full hour in real time to withdraw this immense structure, 98 meters high, weighing 3,800 tons, a distance of less than 100 meters. With the gantry off the launcher, fueling of the third stage with LOX and LH2 can commence, and this takes over 3 hours, only tailing off minutes before liftoff. In this state, Ariane is secured only by the launch table clamps and the cryogenic fueling arms themselves. Gantry withdrawal coincides with evacuation of all personnel from the launch zone, and we are now a little more than 6 minutes from the end of the count, which has been running for now 4.5 hours. In a few moments we shall have a fundamental change in the launcher control situation.
À tous de l'EDO. Attention pour le début de la séquence synchronisée de lancement. Top, moins 6 minutes.
And we're into the last 6 minutes. The synchronized sequence and control of the launcher has changed hands from human hands to the 2 ground computers in the Launch Control Center. The reason for this is very simple. The volume of information handled and command signals issued is so great that even with several hundred extra specialists in the control center, the job could not be done in so short a time. So the 2 computers do the job, controlling all final preparation of the launcher right through to time T-minus 5 seconds. 1 computer handles fluid and propellant configuration tasks and related checkout, and the other deals with final preparation of the electrical systems, initiation of the all-important flight program, start-up of the servo motors, switch over to onboard power, and so on. Inside the CDL, it's largely a question of waiting and watching at this time. Although the task is not finished, the humans can still have the last word. They still possess a manual override capability right up to the last few seconds of the count. Only when the computers have not seen something that they can't see, like downrange tracking station which has gone out, is this facility used. The second handover of control from the ground computers to the launcher's onboard computer occurs precisely 9 seconds before stage 1 ignition. This is when the launcher becomes totally autonomous. If during the synchronized sequence we have a red state, the count returns to minus 6 minutes and we go on to hold. But I hope I won't need to explain that, what happens then. The cryogenic arms are used to fuel up the third stage tanks with liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen during the final hours of the count between gantry withdrawal and now. And you'll see this rather odd two-camera picture again when the arms open 5 seconds before launcher ignition. Two cameras and the two halves of the launcher squash out the center. A quick rundown of the main events before the end of the count. The payload has just switched on to onboard power. The launcher is switched to onboard in just under 1 minute. The servo motors are armed at 40 seconds. The final sequence, inertial guidance platforms released and flight program set to the flight mode at 9 seconds. Cryogenic arms released and opened at 5 seconds, first stage, and liquid booster information at time t. Solid booster ignition and liftoff at plus 4.4 seconds. I'm telling you that now because there won't be time at the time. You may wonder, with so much action packed into the last few minutes, why the count lasts so long. In fact, most of the count corresponds less to a string of set times and more to a sequence of events which must occur in strict order. All systems are now on standby or full alert, and this includes, of course, all the downrange stations monitoring the launcher and the initial satellite tracking stations. The Kourou and Cayenne stations have long since, of course, detected the launcher on the pad, and they've been tracking this stationary object for some time. This is not just the end of a 14.5-hour count, though. Remember, it takes about 2 years to manufacture the launcher, and between 2 and 3 years for the satellite. Quiet in the launch control center, but tense. The tension is mounting steadily here in mission control and elsewhere. This applies to all of us, whether we're on our first or 41st launch. And perhaps a reminder for very latecomers, you're just in time to sit in on Ariane-Start flight 114 carrying SATMEX 5. Don't worry, the bar's still open. Relax and watch this space. And we come up to the last minute of the count.
À tous de l'EDO, attention pour H-1 minute. Top moins 1 minute et les comptes.
We're inside the last 60 seconds. The launcher is on onboard power. The moment to say a couple of simple but heartfelt words to the SATMEX teams, wherever they may be. Estamos con ustedes. Good luck, you people. The servo motors are armed. And we'll leave it now to the DDO to polish it off. He's been practicing counting down from 10 to 0 for weeks. Hope he gets it right.
À tous de l'EDO, attention pour le décompte final. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, unité, feu. Allumage.
We have ignition. We have liftoff.
Tous les paramètres bord sont normaux.
Seconds intermission, we have a steady burn from the 4 Viking 5 engines and the 2 solid propellant boosters. A steady climb. Up from liftoff after the opening of the clamps and the tilt operation just after the launcher cleared the top of the tower. We have a widening climb angle as altitude increases. And you may have noticed the thermal cladding discard in the very early stages of the climb. We have a pretty clear sky, so we should be able to follow visually like the cameras on the launch site.
Les paramètres bord sont normaux.
We're getting a string of announcements from the DDO. All onboard parameters are strictly nominal on the launcher. You may at this moment just be able to catch the noise of the roar of Ariane as the launcher passes almost immediately over our heads here in
Les paramètres bord sont normaux.
Continued nominal
La trajectoire est normale.
situation and nominal trajectory. Everything is coming good from the DDO. The visual tracking will probably change in the next few moments from the cameras, the local cameras, to infrared. We'll get a thermal picture.
Les paramètres bord sont normaux.
When
Extinction des propulseurs d'appoint ergol liquide.
right, we have burnout of the
Largage des deux pales.
solid propellant boosters and
Tous les
jettisoning
paramètres
of these
bord sont
boosters.
normaux et la trajectoire est normale.
All launcher parameters are still strictly nominal. We're radar tracking from the Kourou and Cayenne ground stations at this moment. These will hand over later in the flight to a series of downrange stations, which I'll tell you about when we come to them. And we now have on our screen the trajectory plot.
Les paramètres bord sont normaux et la trajectoire est normale.
Mission. All launcher data strictly nominal still. A word of explanation about the trajectory plot then. You will see on the left of the screen
Extinction du premier étage.
the trajectory path, and there we have announcement of
Séparation du
stage
premier
one,
étage. Allumage du deuxième
burnout,
étage.
separation and ignition
Paramètres bord
of
normaux.
the second stage, and still everything strictly nominal. So on the trajectory path represented by the curve on the left of the screen, we have a little circle which represents the theoretical position of the launcher, and inside that circle is a little cross which is the actual position of the launcher. Obviously the
Tous les
game is to keep the
paramètres sont
cross inside
normaux
the
et la
circle.
trajectoire est normale.
And on the right of the screen we have a column of data. From top to bottom the time intermission, so we're 233 seconds in now, that's around about 4 minutes. The moyen is the tracking station,
Largage de la coiffe.
and we have jettisoning of the fairing. Continuing the data column on the right of your screen, A is altitude, we're at already 125 kilometers up, and V is the launcher velocity. We have a figure at the moment of 3.5 kilometers per second, and our target for satellisation for orbit injection is around
Les
9.6,
paramètres bord
9.7.
sont normaux et la trajectoire est normale.
Everything continues strictly nominal. Top left of your screen we have a little shot of the CVI telemetry station, which is very close to the launch range. This is where data from the launcher itself and from the downrange stations
Paramètres
is
normaux,
received and
trajectoire
processed,
normale.
and it is in fact the data passed on from the CVI station that forms the basis of the announcements which we're getting from the DDO and will continue
Extinction
to
du
get.
deuxième étage.
Burnout of second stage,
Séparation deuxième étage.
separation of second and
Allumage
third,
du troisième étage.
ignition of the third stage, which is always a very good one to
Paramètres
hear.
bord normaux.
Everything continues strictly nominal. And we are now, let me see, we are at an altitude of 193 kilometers. Our velocity is up to almost 5 kilometers per second. Everything continues to look pretty good on the trajectory display. So we're now into the long third stage burn phase over 12 minutes and
Les paramètres bord sont normaux et la trajectoire est normale.
and ignition of the...
Acquisition par la station télémesure de Natal au Brésil.
I have to keep interrupting myself. We've just had an announcement of acquisition of the launcher by the Natal downrange station, which is the first to take over from Kourou and Cayenne. In fact, we have an overlap at the present time, and with all the successive leaps to downrange stations,
Les paramètres bord sont normaux
we
et il reste 12
always have
minutes
a
de
slight
propulsion.
overlap. A quick recap then on the separation procedures. The first and second and third stage separations are, to all intents and purposes,
La
identical.
trajectoire est normale et les paramètres propulsifs sont normaux.
The interstage connections are cut by pyrotechnical devices, and retro squibs fire back on the discarded stage and accelerator squibs on the powered stage to eliminate any risk of collision. The boosters are separated by pyrotechnical cutter systems, and each booster is then pushed away by a set of squibs. And the fairings are separated by an explosive cord, and springs complete the
Tous les
job.
paramètres bord sont normaux et la trajectoire est normale.
As for the satellite separation from its adapter, that's somewhat different, and I'll explain later. A word too about the change of propulsion system, because we're now running on cryogenic, LOX and LH2. The very low temperatures are involved with these propellants, and the feed lines and valves have to be chilled down during the early part of the flight.
Les paramètres bord sont
This
normaux
is
et la
done
trajectoire
by
est normale.
trickling a little bit of the propellant into the pipes, and is similar to the process that is required during filling of the third stage tanks on the ground before liftoff. It's interesting to note the contrast between Ariane-4 and Ariane-5, the new launcher, because Ariane-5 has a cryogenic main stage, and the upper stage engine
Il reste moins de 10 minutes de propulsion, les paramètres bord sont normaux et la trajectoire est normale.
We have 10 minutes burn time of the third stage left, and everything is still hunky-dory on board. So that takes us on to Ariane-5. We had the very highly successful 503 final qualification flight 6 weeks back. Remember the shots we saw earlier in the program. Ariane-5 can now be considered fully qualified after exhaustive analysis of the 503 flight data. This means that the way is now clear for commercial operation, and flight 504 is currently scheduled for April 1999 with a dual launch, and a further 3 Ariane 5 launches are planned for next year, plus 10 Ariane 4 flights, another very busy 12 months in prospect. A very recent press announcement was of particular interest regarding Ariane 5. This concerned the NASA-CNES joint project, which will send an orbiter mission to Mars in the year 2005 using the new European launcher. On this flight, we've already mentioned that the transfer orbit is different from the usual GTO transfer orbit with a perigee of 36,000 kilometers, because using the PVA for perigee velocity augmentation maneuver, we have an initial apogee altitude not of 36,000 kilometers but around 20,000. This requires substantial modification of the process by which the satellite circularizes its orbit from transfer to final. Instead of circularizing in a single operation,
8 minutes de propulsion.
the apogee velocity is increased by one or more apogee burns, and we have 8 minutes of burn time with stage 3 left. This means, of course, higher satellite propellant consumption. But in the case of a satellite equipped with a liquid propellant, reignitable apogee kick motor, this makes it possible to achieve a substantial increase in final in-orbit mass, The excess consumption of satellite propellant to adjust its sub-GTO orbit compared with standard GTO is less than the additional propellant load made possible by the modified launcher performance requirement. In simple terms, the launcher has a less arduous orbit injection task and can carry a higher payload mass.
Paramètres bord normaux, trajectoire normale.
Everything still strictly nominal. In simple terms, the PVA option has already been used for 4 earlier Ariane-4 missions, flights 54, 57, 69 and 74. This gain is further enhanced by combining the PVA maneuver with the OURS technique. Sorry about the acronyms, but OURS stands in French for Optimized Utilization of Propellant Reserve, and this is an interesting one. The propellant reserve is an excess amount of third-stage propellant carried systematically by the launcher to enable it to cater for trajectory corrections which may be necessary due to atmospheric aerodynamic.
6 minutes de propulsion.
6 minutes
Les
burn
paramètres
time
bord sont normaux et la trajectoire est
stage
normale.
3. Or mass discrepancies and achieve its target transfer orbit with a 99% probability factor before it runs out of gas. This means that the reserve is normally just a reserve, and by extension,
Acquisition par la station de télémesure de l'île d'Ascension.
and we have acquisition of the launcher by the Ascension Island tracking station out there in mid-Atlantic. This means that the reserve is just a reserve, and by extension, by accepting a lower probability factor, a substantial part of the reserve can be burnt to enhance the satellite service life gain already mentioned. It all comes down to the simple fact of satellite in-orbit life. As long as there is some gas left in the tank, you can continue to correct orbit drift, stay on station, and stay
Les
in
paramètres
business.
bord sont normaux et la trajectoire est normale.
Everything strictly nominal. A word of reassurance nevertheless, the third stage tanks are not totally depleted. Enough propellant is left to complete the avoidance procedure after separation. And I think this is the time when I will, if you will permit, take a little mini break to catch my breath a bit and give you a rest from the sound of my voice for a few seconds.
Il reste 5 minutes de propulsion, les paramètres bord sont normaux et la trajectoire est normale.
Well, it didn't last long. We have 5 minutes burn time on stage 3 left. And before we say goodbye, it is to our passenger, I think we should say something more about SATMEX 5. So a brief recapitulation before SATMEX 5 pops off into autonomous orbit after separation. It's a Hughes Space and Communications HS601HP, HP for high power bus with a liftoff mass of nearly 4.2 metric tons, triple axis stabilization, and a design lifetime of 15 years. Times have indeed changed since Morelos 1, the first Mexican satellite. We are talking here, in fact, of the fifth Telecom satellite for Mexico, which can
Il reste
be
environ 4 minutes de propulsion.
regarded
Les
as
paramètres sont normaux et la trajectoire est normale.
a pioneer in the field, and the minutes are ticking away. We're only 4 minutes from end of burn time. Morelos 1 and 2, which were launched back in 85, both Hughes built and both put up on the shuttle, were followed by Solidaridad 1 and 2, which were launched on Ariane-1 in 1993 and 94. And in fact, I personally remember the subsequent tequila parties like they were yesterday. What has changed, of course, is power and capacity. SATMEX 5 capacity represents about 10 times that for Morelos 2, which is now imminent for withdrawal from service. And SATMEX 5 indeed breaks new ground in an entirely different domain. It's equipped with a ZIPS, xenon ion propulsion system, in other words, electrical propulsion, talked about for so long. And
Il reste 3 minutes de
positive fact.
propulsion, les paramètres bord sont normaux, la trajectoire est normale.
3 minutes burn time. The ultimate objective with this type of system is very substantially reduced satellite propellant mass, which opens the way to a triple option, reduced launch cost, increased working payload, or extended satellite lifetime, or indeed a combination of two or all of these features. And obviously there could be no SATMEX 5 without SATMEX SA, so perhaps a quick executive summary. SATMEX SA is a Mexican private business corporation responsible for operating Mexican telecommunication satellites. The company was formed in 1997 following a privatization auction for 75% interest in the public satellite system, operated until then by Telecomunicaciones de Mexico,
Les paramètres à
Telecom,
bord sont normaux et la trajectoire est normale.
an offshoot of the Mexican Ministry of Transport and Telecommunications. The three shareholders are Telecom with 25%, Telefónica Austria with 38 1/4, and L'Oréal with the remaining 37 3/4. SATMEX SA is in fact the result of a bilateral alliance between Mexico and the USA,
Paramètres à bord normaux, trajectoire normale.
represented by Austria and L'Oréal. And the mere alliance goes considerably deeper, in fact,
Encore
because there
80
is
secondes de propulsion.
a reciprocal agreement under the terms of which Mexico can operate satellites over the USA and vice versa.
Encore 60 secondes de propulsion,
And we
paramètres
just have
stables.
1 minute left of burn time with stage 3. Which means that we're less than 2 minutes away from separation of the satellite, because for reasons I'll explain
Encore
in a
40
moment.
secondes de propulsion.
40 seconds to go, because the time between shutdown of stage 3 and separation of the satellite is
30 secondes de propulsion.
extremely short. 30 seconds.
« 20 secondes.
20.
Acquisition par Libreville au Gabon.
Launcher picked up by the Libreville
Encore 10
tracking
secondes.
station. 10 seconds to go.
Extinction du troisième étage sur commande de guidage.
Shutdown of the third stage cryogenic engine. Which
Début
means
de la phase d'orientation.
spin up, which is all that's required in terms of reorientation, because the satellite is in fact the satellite in stage 3 assembly is pointing in the right direction.
Mise en rotation du troisième étage.
Third stage spin.
C'est bon. Séparation SATMEX.
And we have separation of the SATMEX 5 payload passenger on this flight. Applause all round, happy smiles, the tension's gone. The basic job has been done. The satellite is now commencing its autonomous life in orbit, and the task of the satellite teams will begin in earnest in the coming hours. Initial pickup of the satellite from in a downrange station will be in Indonesia by the Dan Magot station. The satellite will be opening its solar panels in 3 days from time, with a first perigee burn after 4 days and the first apogee burn after 6 hours, and we have a replay.
Tous les paramètres bord sont normaux. Paramètres bord normaux. Paramètres bord sont normaux, la trajectoire est normale.
Well, after that separation and launch of SATMEX 5, Ariane-Start has an order book situation of 40 satellites to launch, and the new business, well, we had a little bit about the OURS just now, and OURS spells in French also the word ours, which means bear, hence that little kitty that you just saw. And another replay.
Décollage. Tous les paramètres bord sont normaux. Paramètres bord normaux. Paramètres bord sont normaux, la trajectoire est normale.
In the meantime, the Ariane mission has been completed with the avoidance and passivation maneuvers. Avoidance is just that, similar to the retro rocket procedure on interstage separation. In other words, a distancing maneuver to ensure that there's no risk of collision between the remnant third stage and the newly released satellite. And passivation simply means dumping any remaining fuel in the stage 3 tanks. And another replay before we have the speeches, which will be coming up in a moment or two. The arms are open. We have ignition. And we have liftoff. And you notice there very clearly the thermal cladding peeling off the second stage.
Tous les paramètres bord sont normaux.
Well, all very much worth waiting for after the frustration of yesterday's postponement. And we're now going to hear from Françoise Bouzita, Secretary General of Ariane-Start.
Tout à fait, là je monte de plus en plus. Alors on y va? Ok. Bien, chers amis.
Dear friends, today, with a slight delay in respect to what was foreseen, we have a new satellite in orbit, a success for Ariane. These are two reasons to rejoice and two reasons to be thankful. Thank you, first of all, to our customer of today. Thank you to Mexico pioneer country in satellite communications, and thank you to SATMEX for the trust shown in Arianespace. After Solidaridad 1 and 2, launched in 1993 and 94, SATMEX 5 is the third Mexican satellite entrusted to Ariane. The orbit reached is particularly accurate, and we hope that with this new satellite, SATMEX will have a high-performance tool serving Mexico and the Americas. Thank you all. Thank you to the teams, and thank you to the very highly professional and excellent teams. This launch V114 is the 41st consecutive success of Ariane-4. You have proven time after time that you totally master the Ariane tool. This allows Arianespace to provide for quality, availability, and flexibility. But we must continue, even if it's almost the end of the year. It's not yet the Christmas vacation, and we must continue to prepare the next launch with the same rigor. The next launch is set for the 21st of December, and then it's going to be in 1999 with a highly ambitious launch schedule. 10 Ariane 4s and Ariane 5, which after the success of Flight 503, Ariane is totally operational, and we foresee 3 to 4 launches for Ariane 5. These two launch vehicles will provide Europe with a tool for reinforcement on its place on the market. Customers are not mistaken, as Arianespace has already signed a good number of contracts, which will represent 60% of the market, with the 12 contracts signed, and its backlog consists in 39 satellites. Now, these are many reasons to rejoice, and we can celebrate with the Mexicans. I'm sure they're going to do this well.
Bonsoir à tous. Nous vivons un moment doublement important. Il est important pour une entreprise qui a été récemment créée, une entreprise mexicaine, SATMEX, qui réussit aujourd'hui le premier succès d'une chaîne de succès qui viendra dans un futur. J'en ai aucun doute de tout cela. C'est un moment très important pour les télécommunications au Mexique. Il signifie tout d'abord la continuité d'un effort qui a été commencé il y a maintenant 30 ans. SATMEX 5 est vraiment la continuité de l'effort que beaucoup de Mexicains ont commencé à faire il y a 30 ans. Il est très important pour le développement du pays, qui nous permettra d'avoir une plus grande capacité de satellites pour nos communications. Mais c'est très important pour les communications, les télécommunications, parce que nous pourrons avoir une empreinte plus grande pour que ces satellites puissent participer dans d'autres parties du monde.
Coverage for this spacecraft to contribute towards communications in a wider part of the world. I would like to congratulate all those who were in the front line, Mr. Autrey,
qui, avec son esprit d'entreprise, a commencé l'effort pour acheter SATMEX et a groupé autour de lui toute une entreprise importante. Il a eu aujourd'hui son premier succès. Je félicite aussi un jeune comme l'entreprise de notre pays, à Lauro, pour sa connaissance, pour sa décision. Il a presque poussé le satellite de ses propres forces
almost pushed the satellite into orbit himself.
Et je remercie aussi Hughes,
And I'd also like to
qui a
thank the
construit cet
company
instrument
Hughes, who
formidable pour les
built this
télécommunications, dont
beautiful
le
tool
Mexique
for
va se bénéficier.
telecommunications,
Et surtout
which
Ariane,
Mexico will
qui vient
benefit
d'avoir
from.
un
And
autre
I'd like to
succès,
thank
donc
Ariane,
elle a
Ariane-Space,
placé
which has
SATMEX 5
signed
à
another
l'extérieur.
great success
Félicitations à
and
tous.
has placed
Je crois qu'il
SATMEX
s'agit
5
là
into the
d'un grand
appropriate
succès
orbit.
des télécommunications du Mexique.
Thank you all. This is a great
Et grâce à
success
ce
for
succès, nous serons à
telecommunications
l'avant-garde
in
des
Mexico.
télécommunications dans le monde.
And
Merci.
thus we're way up in the front of telecommunications.
Muchísimas gracias, señor secretario.
Monsieur le ministre.
Thank you, Your Excellency.
Il y a quelques minutes, nous avons eu le premier succès de cette mission
We
SATMEX 5
celebrated this first success of SATMEX 5 when our spacecraft was separated from its launch vehicle. This was the first phase of a number of important moments, but it was the most risky one. Yesterday we were obliged to take a decision to postpone the launch because of an anomaly in the telemetry of the spacecraft. Hughes recommended us to take this decision, but we were absolutely certain, as we were under contract with Hughes, we were certain that our contract between Hughes and the Ministry of Communications would guarantee that the satellite was well built, perfectly built. And thanks to the numerous tests made in the course of the manufacture of our spacecraft, we were absolutely certain that it was of highest quality, thanks to the participation also of Mexican engineers during the whole period of manufacture. This is why we can say that today we were certain to be able to launch our spacecraft tonight. We thank Hughes for having let our technicians take part and demonstrate that we're capable of doing this. Thanks to Ariane, who has another launch record in its books. So thank you, Ariane, and have a good trip, SATMEX 5.
That concludes the speeches, and I've no doubt that in a second or two we shall be seeing Ariane lift off once more. Just to complete what I was saying a little while back, there's been a considerable amount of new business for Ariane-Start. I'll come back to that again
Attention
after
pour
the
le
replay.
décompte final. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, unité, feu. Allumage. Décollage. Tous les paramètres bord sont normaux.
Right, at the third attempt, just to complete, Ariane-Start's order book for this year stands at 8 new contracts, but the final figure for the 12 months is likely to reach 14, comparing favorably with last year's excellent performance. So that appears indeed to have been the last of the replays. No, sir, on the right there, that last sequence was not in fact launch 115. You'll have to wait a bit for that. So, as they say, we finally made it. Thank you for joining us wherever you are. We hope the 24-hour slippage caused you no undue discomfort of any kind. And we hope also that you enjoyed tonight's show. It's been our pleasure, the French commentary team and myself, to talk you through the event. The next event in the series will indeed be Flight 115 with Pass 6B for PanAmSat in just over 2 weeks from now. So why not join us again for the Ariane Christmas launch? For the moment, though, it's time to lock up the commentary cabin and slip quietly away for a small glass of milk and a banana, or perhaps something a wee bit more exciting. So this is au revoir and good night, buenas noches, gute Nacht to you all from the Guiana Space Center in Kourou and from your commentator, Simon Hayes.
Décollage. Tous les paramètres bord sont normaux. Paramètres bord normaux. Paramètres bord sont normaux, la trajectoire est normale. Feu. Allumage. Décollage. Tous les paramètres bord sont normaux. Paramètres bord normaux. Paramètres bord sont normaux, la trajectoire est normale. À tous de l'EDO, attention pour le décompte final. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, unité, feu. Allumage. Décollage. paramètres bord sont normaux. Paramètres bord normaux. Paramètres bord sont normaux, la trajectoire est normale. Sept, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, unité, feu. Allumage. Décollage. Tous les paramètres bord sont normaux. À tous de l'EDO, attention pour le décompte final. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, unité, feu. Allumage. Décollage. Tous les paramètres bord sont normaux.